If you've been looking to buy a house, you've probably asked the question, what is this house worth? Is it based off of whatever the tax records say? Is it just based off of whatever the seller puts it up for list at? How do I know what a house is worth? In today's video, we're gonna talk about the differences between asking price, tax value, market value, appraisal value, all these values, because they are all different and it's important to know. Stay tuned. Okay, first and foremost, let's talk about asking price. The asking price can be whatever the seller wants. This may or may not be based off of reality. It may or may not be based off of any real data. It can actually be whatever the seller wants to list it for. It's kind of like if somebody lists something for sale on eBay. They can list it at whatever price they want, and the market or buyers will determine whether it's worth that price, whether it sells quickly or whether it takes a long time and the price has to be reduced. So the asking price is not a good measure of value because it can be based on anything. The second thing that most commonly comes up is tax assessed value. So is a house worth whatever the tax records say? What the tax records say a house is worth may or may not be the same thing as what the market feels a house is worth. Typically, somebody from the county is going to go out and assess the property, and they're probably only going to take into account some of the basic features like the square footage, the location, the lot size, whether it's 1 story or 2 story, whether it has a pool or not. These things are good for determining value for tax purposes, but not necessarily indicative of what a house is worth. So if it's not based on what the asking price is, and if it's not based on what the tax records say, how do we know what houses are worth? This is where an appraisal comes in. If you didn't get a chance to watch my last video all about appraisals, I'll have it linked up above and down below. I definitely encourage you to check that video out as I go into a lot of detail about what happens during an appraisal, what happens when that appraisal doesn't come back at the number that you think it should. But suffice it to say, an appraisal is going to be something that's ordered by a lender. So typically when somebody's buying a house, they're generally using a mortgage. And when they're using a mortgage, the lender is going to order an appraisal on that property. The appraisal is ordered so that the lender can determine the value of the home to make sure that they're not lending too much money compared to what that property is worth. So an appraiser is going to go out and appraise the property based on the features and functions of that house and how it compares to very similar properties that have sold in the last 6 months to a year. They're going to be typically located in the same neighborhood. They're going to be the same amount of stories, 1 or 2 or 3 or 4. They're going to have similar lot sizes, similar square footage, and then they're actually going to go and look at all the features and the functions of the house, and they're going to compare and weigh out the value of each of those things to land at what the appraised value is. This is what market value is based off of. What is the market willing to pay for a house like this? Keep in mind, market value changes as areas become more trendy to live in, as school zoning changes, as areas get nicer or less nice, as even floor plans change in their trending. If you look at older houses, they typically have formal living and formal dining rooms. In newer houses, you probably won't see a formal dining room, and you definitely won't see formal living rooms really anymore unless it's a custom house. The buyers, over time, their wants and needs change. So market value can fluctuate with what the market feels like a house is worth. And this is also very different from some estimates that you might see online. A lot of people get tripped up because they look at Zillow's estimates, or they even look at the HAR estimates when they're looking at a house, and they use that to formulate what they think a house is worth. But keep in mind, these estimates aren't necessarily based off of what house is sold for and what the value of different features and functions of that house are. The Zillow algorithm isn't going to look at pictures of houses and say, oh, this is a good sized backyard. The street that's behind it is not a busy road. It's zoned to great schools. These are upgraded cabinets or upgraded flooring. These things aren't going to be taken into account. Typically, these estimates online are going to be based off of what houses were listed at and what they went pending at, but not necessarily what they eventually sold for and whether the things in that house are things that buyers will want. And so this is why a CMA generated by an agent is very, very valuable in determining what the value of a house is. Just to be clear, an appraisal report is an official report generated by an appraiser. A CMA generated by an agent is not necessarily an official report. It is still an estimate, but It is an estimate based off of the experience of that professional, knowing the area, knowing the schools, knowing all the features and functions, looking at all of the pictures to come up with what they believe market value is. And typically it's a range because it's not an exact science. We aren't appraisers, but we can get pretty close to what we think the appraised value will be, and that's how we determine market value. So after saying all this, I do want to remind you that today's market is very different than the market even just a couple years ago. And that's because anytime there is severe low levels of inventory, this can change and affect the perceived value of a property, supply and demand, right? If there's not enough supply and there's very high demand, then the value of items or products or things like homes will go up. That's why you're seeing a lot of people offering more than what the asking price is, or even what the market value based on comparable properties would say that that property is worth, because they want a property that is in high demand and that there is low supply of. Everything I'm talking about right now doesn't change the fact that market value is still determined based off of what homes sold for recently, but it is a fluid thing and it is still an estimate because some people are willing to pay more for a property whenever it meets their family's needs and they really need to move, or they're being relocated and they need to get a house. They might be willing to offer more. At the end of the day, making an offer is still going to be based on what you want to make an offer at, but having the advice, guidance, and coaching of a real estate professional can really help, especially if you're needing to make a strong offer in a market like right now, where properties might be getting 15 or 20 offers on them. So it's important to have a good agent who can direct you and guide you through those steps. So if you want to learn more about appraisals, click or tap the video I've got right here where I talk all about appraisals and what happens if an appraisal comes in low. And if you'd like to see a home tour that I did recently, click or tap this video right here. Thank you so much for watching to the end. Give it a like if you like this content. Make sure that you're subscribed down below, and we'll see you guys in the next video.